Kat, I'm going to read to you what one of the authors of the report, a conservative lawmaker, Georges Fenech, said. He said, "We could have avoided the attack of the Bataclan if there had not been these failures of intelligence." Do you agree with that?
I think it is conceivable. I mean, George Benech also said that ultimately he doubts that whether all the elements could have come together to really allow the attack. But there's no doubt that the French intelligence services could have done a lot better, could have given themselves a better chance of stopping the attack. And one of the main attackers on the Bataclan, Sami Amemour, he was under surveillance for a while by the French services, and the Commission says does not understand why why the surveillance on him stopped. So there are missed opportunities. There are thousands of leads, however. So if those opportunities had been followed up, who's to know as to whether they would have really stood out among the thousands of other people that you could potentially investigate.
That's an important point. Thousands of other people. We know that the first cell, the one that shot up the satirical newspaper Charlie Hebdo, they're people who had been active in the 1990s and then kind of gone under the radar.
Yeah, exactly. So, people like Saeed Kouachi, who had been under surveillance. He had been under surveillance by the intelligence unit of the Paris police. Then Saeed Kouachi moved away from Paris, where he was picked up by the National Intelligence Service. But actually that surveillance was interrupted. That pass off of the case from one service to another was not perfect according to the Commission. And so that's why the Commission is recommending a streamlining of counterterrorism services to avoid this kind of lack of coordination between the existing services.
Frank Foley, when the second attack took place, the November 13th attacks on Paris and the National Stadium, at that moment in time, did you say to yourself, gosh, how come this is happening again so fast? And especially when we see that there were links between those two groups.
I think, it was no surprise to me that attack took place, because we did have indications from people like Marc Trevidic, a counterterrorism judge, and others that the sheer level of attacks in France was unprecedented. And so it was inevitable that one got through. But I think I wrote a book about French counterterrorism, comparing it to the British some years ago. And even then it was obvious that France has too many intelligence units focusing on counterterrorism. They overlap, they compete with each other. And that can actually it can reduce their ability to prevent terrorist attacks. So I wasn't surprised. I think this report has got the right analysis, but some of its recommendations will be difficult to implement, however.
But these things kind of wax and wane, don't they, Frank Foley? Because after the London bombings of 7/7, people were saying, "Oh, the French services are much savvier than the British." What's changed since?
I think there were always problems and tensions in the French services. And France had an incredible record, no terrorist attacks for 16 years. And so, but many of us who studied France did point out, even at that time, that there were problems in the organization of intelligence. France has a very strong capability to gather large amounts of intelligence, very powerful intelligence agencies, but they're not well coordinated. That's what this report points out. And so in some ways this report wants to turn the clock back to when there was a renseignement généraux, a kind of territorial intelligence service, which was abolished by Nicolas Sarkozy. This report wants to bring it back. So perhaps some people would argue that the abolition of the renseignement généraux by Nicolas Sarkozy changed things for French intelligence. And now this report wants to go back to that.
Wants to go back to that. This report put out by lawmakers, is it on par in its scope and how much the follow-up there will be to, say, the 9/11 task force? Do you think that there's going to be a follow-up after these recommendations?
I think there will be a follow-up. It's a bipartisan report. The government will have to respond. But I think there are even if there is a follow-up, there are problems on the ground in terms of how its recommendations can be implemented. It calls for an effective fusion of the National Police, the Gendarmerie, and the Paris Intelligence Unit. These are units that have had a lot of rivalries and tensions between them in the past. If you try to fuse them together, is that going to work? So I think there should be a follow-up. There should be a big reflection on this in France, and even though it's difficult to implement it on the ground, all the services should be called to account and should be made to explain their actions.
Yeah, in compiling its findings, the Commission visited the U.S. National Counterterrorism Center and in its conclusion says there should be something similar here in France. Why isn't there something similar? What's the reason?
Well, there have been coordinating centres in France. There's one called UCLAT, which is a very modest one. There's another one set up last year by Bernard Cazeneuve, the Interior Minister, which is a kind of operational unit for the prevention of terrorism. That's the second one. And now, effectively, this report wants to set up a third one, which would be a kind of national counterterrorism centre. So the problem in France is not lack of coordination centres, it's potentially too many centres, and then who coordinates the coordinators? It may become ridiculous. So this is one area where the report has to clarify what it means. We've seen some of the authors of the reports saying they want a national counterterrorism agency. That's not going to happen, and they know it. It would be a coordinating centre. So what would be the relationship of this new coordinating centre, which would have more powers? What would be its relationship with the existing coordinating centres? And that is reflective of the broader issue of organisational problems in France that has, in a sense, too many coordinating centres.
Yeah, lots of layers there. Frank Foley, when you look at the links between, again, the Paris attacks of January 2015, the Paris attacks of last November, the attacks in Brussels, when you see that there are links between all of these people, does that reassure you? It tells you that there aren't that many of these guys and that they should just be monitored better? Or does it scare you?
I don't think any of us should be scared by terrorism. This is a threat which affects us politically. We don't like seeing non-state actors show a display of violence in our capital cities. It upsets our politicians. It unnerves the media. And we shouldn't be scared by it in the sense of our own personal integrity. Our own physical integrity is not threatened. There's statistically a very, very low probability of any one of us getting caught up in one of these attacks. So they don't really affect us in our daily lives in a way that something like Brexit will affect British people, for example, every single one of them. So this is small in terms of people's everyday life, but I think it is reassuring to me that these were all on the radar at some stage. Then wrong decisions were made. That's regrettable, but they were all on the radar, so that does reassure me to some extent.
Frank Foley of the Department of War Studies at King's College London, many thanks for speaking with us.
Thanks, Steve.